Hello, and welcome to Living the Life, which will be, I say in great faith, an expanding resource which will be useful to anybody, whatever your denominational background and whatever your current belief state is, anybody who is interested in discovering more about the story of Jesus. And when I say the story of Jesus, a story which of course has been referred to as the greatest story ever told, I don't just mean the kind of simple outline. I mean to actually understand how the different characters that we meet in the Gospels actually represent something much bigger, to suddenly engage with this story much more as if it's an adventure. Because it really is. God so loved the world that he just didn't give us a set of rules. He sent his son to create events which actually suck in the world of politics, the world of kind of social context of Jesus, the historical moment, as the whole of time kind of revolves around the life of Jesus. It's AC, BC, AC, ACDC, AD, BC, etc., etc. Um, and yet, funny thing is that even in church, we often don't get the kind of the fullness of that sense of story. We just assume that you know the basic framework. Jesus was kind of born under Pontius Pilate of a virgin. He kind of lived, did some ministry, and then he kind of upset a few people and he got executed. But theologically, we understand that that was all about the forgiveness of our sins, and so on and so forth. Well, we kind of that's a given. But to actually understand why it is that people behave the way they do as we encounter them in the gospel suddenly opens up kind of new levels of meaning and brings the text alive. And so what we're going to attempt to do in this series is to kind of paint the broad brushstroke picture while we fill in the detail. You see, very often we've done it the other way around. We've assumed a very vague kind of detail and we know roughly what a face looks like, and now we're going to draw a picture of a face. But almost like children, we start with the details, and the problem with that is you work on the details of an eye and then you work on the details of a nose, and when you've finished you have a distorted image. The picture doesn't look like what it was supposed to look like. And so we're going to try and do something which actually is not being done very often. Most people in modern scholarship say, oh, well, we don't bother trying to kind of harmonise the Gospels and put them together into a single story. And the reason they say that is because they all disagree with each other. And so you say, well, what do I know any better? Well, the funny thing is, if you go back over 150 years or so, people did know the story. It's actually, the problem is modern criticism and a kind of a cynical approach. And so we're going to actually take a kind of a modern view of an ancient solution to how you fit the Gospels together, and we're going to discover, and I'll explain it as we go. So if you kind of think to yourself, oh, he's just going to tell me a kind of a believer's picture, I'm going to bring genuine kind of critical method to the process. We are going to we're going to ask hard questions of the text as we fit it together, but we are going to see it does actually fit. And then a story emerges and it kind of modifies and changes our experience of that story. So it sounds like a big ask, and it is, which is why the series is going to get very big. But because the series is going to get big, it becomes increasingly important to do a video like this, which is kind of an explainer to kind of guide you through what's about to come. So there won't just be videos, which should be released every single week. There'll be new videos in this series as we start to work through the life of Jesus, but there will also be very detailed notes covering what I've been saying. Any of the PowerPoint slides that you appear on this video will be in those notes. Alongside those notes, there will also be a new integrated translation of the Gospels. And when I say integrated, what I mean is we'll have arranged all of the events into chronological order and harmonized them. And so that will be available to download. And so you can kind of work at different levels. So it probably makes sense if I just kind of explain a little bit, which may seem rather detailed and you don't want to know, but if you take it on board, it might help going forwards. So for instance, because there will be a lot of videos, we're using a kind of a simplish naming convention. You'll notice that we're going to start by telling the ministry years story. So, well, why don't we start with the birth narratives? Well, I did think about starting with the birth narratives. Over the years, I've produced these playbooks, as I refer to them, these manuals, which cover the events we're going to be doing in this series. But one of the things I discovered is I never got the opportunity to really do them in detail, because you teach them on a day and you still have to kind of skim through them, which is partly why we're doing this now. So we could have started with the birth years, but on the whole, the bit that people are really interested in, where the real meat of the story is in the ministry years. And it's often in the ministry years. Well, actually, no, that's not totally true. But there are things in the ministry years that surprise people when they see them. They don't realize they're going to be surprised because they think they understand the ministry years. And suddenly when they see, for instance, the way in which Jesus' ministry develops, and the way in which actually there are shifts in public opinion at different phases during the ministry, and where does that come from, and how it reflects actually what we understand as the theological context of Judea and Galilee at the time of Jesus. So we can see, if you like, that actually different characters are kind of coming to the fore in the narrative between Jesus and the religious authorities, Jesus and the Roman authorities, and so on and so forth. But coming back to the question, why are we starting with the ministry years? Well, I have already at this stage got a kind of a reasonably detailed review of Jesus's birth narratives. In time that may get replaced, but it just seemed that that's there if you want it. I also have, again, done something on the last week. Although the last week of Jesus' life is a short period of time, in terms of gospel text, it actually takes up roughly a third of all gospel text. So roughly a third at the end, just under a third for Jesus' birth and early childhood narratives, and then just over a third is the ministry years. So we're going to start with the ministry years, and then we'll add the others, and we'll have the complete set at that point. So anyway, coming back to that naming convention, what you'll notice is that this is called, therefore, Living the Life 2, because technically it's the second part, because the birth will be the first part. Now, Living the Life 2 will be the second part, and 3 will be the last week. So Living the Life 2, the ministry years. So that's kind of the basic framework. And then there's a number. There'll be a digit, then a point, and then 2 digits after that. And that's quite useful to understand, in that we're going to look at the ministry years of Jesus in fundamentally in 4 sections. So videos that are named 0 point something are kind of setup videos, like this one, which is 0.00. There's nothing more fundamental than this one. And then 0.01 will take a little bit longer, setting up the agendas of the 4 gospel writers and who they are and what the early church knew about the things that we've lost. Probably 0.02 will kind of look at actually how they wrote their gospels according to the early church. And we will review those opinions in the light of modern research, because the thing that's interesting is, while they were dismissed 100 years ago, all of those dismissals turn out to be irrelevant, and actually new work that's been done on the Gospels allows us to kind of return to the view of the early church with quite a degree of confidence. So there'll be a couple of sessions in the 0 point somethings. But then we're going to start Jesus' ministry with the kind of what I refer to as the beginnings. There's actually a lot more period of time covered in the Gospels, but only in a handfuls of verses, under which Jesus is ministering and is teaching and is called a rabbi, but where John is also ministering at the same time. And it's one of those things that once we start to draw them out, you'll see the implications are all there in the Gospels, that that's a much longer period of time than most people think it is, that Jesus is developing under John the Baptist. So that's beginnings, and we cover those periods with 1 point something something. And then we'll move on to what we often think of as the beginning of Jesus' ministry, but as it turns out is actually the second phase, which is when he starts to itinerate around Galilee. And actually, as we're going to see, he takes several trips in kind of circulating around Galilee, and he drops down to the feasts from time to time. And of course, that's the big major period, and it's where but even that breaks into different sections. You see, initially, as Jesus is itinerating around Galilee, the disciples are with him while they learn. And then in the next phase, he sends them out, and the phase that he's involved with then, they are doing a lot more of the work, and actually things multiply. So we go from beginnings, then we go through growth as Jesus makes his first tour, and then we hit a phase where things are really, really multiplying. The multiplication becomes so enormous and so great, and there's a kind of a crescendoing moment. And in that crescendo, Jesus has to shift his base of operations, and all 4 Gospels tell us how Jesus moves down to the south and starts to operate close to the vicinity of Jerusalem, which then puts him in a much more kind of politically sensitive location. And so we find that some of the narrative in there, the arguments that are being put to him, are now slightly different. And the responses of people are slightly different, but actually Jesus' agenda becomes also at the same time radically more radical, if I can put it that way. And so there's this kind of crescendoing moment. That very final week I refer to as the climax. So but we don't do that in this one. We do that as Living the Life session 3, which is living the last week, becomes the climax. So we're going to move through those different phases from beginning, under John the Baptist and the early kind of sporadic ministry, to more deliberate taking tours of Galilee. And so we see growth in that period to the point where things suddenly multiply as now the disciples start to operate with a bit more independence, and things really kind of start to explode. And Herod is saying, my goodness, what's happened? I've heard about a miracle over there and one over there. And there's that multiplication to the point where we suddenly hit this crescendo, where the agenda suddenly of Jesus comes with the weight of what he's established in Galilee, comes right down to the heart of the religious Jewish system, down in Judea, also in the base of the Pharisees in Jericho, and across towards Ephraim, where we know that's where the kind of, if you like, while Jerusalem is always the center of everything, but there's a kind of the weight of, if you like, of Phariseeism is in that area. And the arguments become a lot more kind of controversial. And of course, in the end, they lead in the crescendo right up to that moment of climax where things turn against Jesus and he is executed. But within the context of the law, he provides the ultimate sacrifice for which there is nothing else needed. So that's the story we're hoping to tell. I'm wanting to convey, as I do it, some enthusiasm. So how do we go about it? Well, you'll notice as we go through these videos, every now and again, a piece of information will pop up. In YouTube, if you're watching on YouTube, YouTube has this card system, and if you see a little eye up there, you click on it, it will give you a suggestions of resources that you can go to separately. So if I've had a teaching video that explains something a little bit deeper, you can click on that and go straight to watch the video. For instance, when we do the Sermon on the Mount, I did a series on the Sermon on the Mount where we looked at them in the light of modern psychological research. Well, I won't do a huge amount on the psychological side when we're doing this run through the Sermon on the Mount. So you might spot a little kind of flag turns up there. In fact, if we put one up now, so hopefully I'm saying that in great faith, there should be a little one popping up now. Actually, you can go and kind of download the first set of notes that I want you to look at, which will just kind of break basic events into those sections I just talked about: beginnings, growth, multiplication, and then crescendo. And you'll see them all kind of laid out for you. So you can go and download that now, try it out. It'll take you to a holding kind of page or a home page, which eventually, as time goes on, will have links to all of these videos, to all of the notes that go with them. And then, very importantly, for those that want it, there will be a much more detailed set of translations of the gospel which have been done for this series. And then those translations have then been turned into an integrated text, which becomes, if you like, a single account, drawing words from every single one, so that every single word of every single gospel is woven together into a single story. And that will be in that document. But you'll be able to go from that woven together story back to a kind of a translation, and the translation will then have an interlinear, so you can see the Greek words. You can actually follow that every Greek word is there. So that for those who need that kind of thing and who wants that kind of thing, and understand me, I like that kind of thing. It means that you can check that when I've translated a word in a particular way, you can actually see what the Greek was. You can see why I've done it that way, and there'll be kind of translation notes and so on. So for those who love that kind of level of detail, you can do that. For those who like the note side, just to be aware, while the notes are pretty copious, there will be things that I say and we put up on PowerPoint slides behind me that won't be in the notes, so you still might need to write some stuff in. But if that all adds up to being far too much work, don't worry, because within that naming convention, some of the videos, you'll notice their title will end with a little asterisk. And if it ends with a little asterisk, there is a route that you can take through watching the videos, because they will be, if you like, summary videos. They will be kind of anticipating forwards or looking and reviewing back. And so if you don't want to get too much into the detail, you'll still get a lot out if you just kind of choose the asterisks set of videos, and it will kind of take you through in chronological order, and with the set of notes that I'm going to ask you to download right at the beginning. To kind of get a rough feel, you should be able to put the story together in your own time, in your own space, without having to kind of invest in the huge commitment to kind of go through every single kind of verse and every single word. which it sounds a nightmare, doesn't it, doing it? But actually, it will be done in a way which is very engaging, because the story of Jesus really is engaging. And if you know how to tell it correctly, even the detail becomes exciting. It's a bit like the it's a bit like the kind of the family trees at the back of the Lord of the Rings, which the publishers thought, who on earth is going to read all of these appendices at the back of the Lord of the Rings with people's family trees? But when people are so enjoying the story, they want sometimes to go back down to those details and go, now I see it, now I see it. So anyway, that's my intention. Is this been a good explainer video? Maybe not. But hopefully you've got a rough idea of how you can use the names of the videos to kind of plan where you're going to. Of course, they'll always be in the description. The description will always contain the references that we're looking at in that particular passage. It will always contain a link to the homepage, which will allow you to kind of go and dig around and find the notes as you need them. And then there'll probably be other stuff that goes in there. So I probably need to draw this one to a close because I don't want to spend forever doing the explainer. But I would love you to I'd love to give you a real invite to join with me, and please respond back, send me questions, and I'll try and answer them as we kind of go through, either by responding to the questions that you raise in the comments section of the notes, or by addressing them directly to video, because if you're watching them as they come out, I'll be able to do that, of course. So I'd love to invite you in that sense, but more than that, explain a little bit how it's all going to fit together. And I hope you really enjoy this. I have loved what has been an adventure over 30 years of me arguing with the text, try and make it fit together. And in the last few years, it's suddenly all resolved. To the place where, as you can probably pick up, I have a great confidence in the harmonization that we've produced. And not because I'm arrogant, and also because I'm not precious about it. I will modify it if new research comes out and new information comes out. But actually, over the years, as I've kind of held things and thought about them and tussled with them, it's suddenly become clear that it's actually not as complicated as it looks. It's just there's a lot of it. But once it all starts working, you discover that you've hit the rhythm, which makes all the gospel narratives fit together, stop contradicting each other as it seems. They don't. It's just the perspective. You know, one thing seems to be in the way of another at certain times. But once you understand how they've been written, and we'll explain all of that, what agenda they've been written for, what writing styles were at the time, how people perceive the flow of events, all of these things there's now modern research on, which all play together to help us integrate the four Gospels into a single story, which really is the greatest story ever told. So, look forward to joining in the next session. Bye.